Welcome to another edition of One of One, a PLLRS Podcast. I am your host, Keith Nelson, filling in for the incomparable Reg, and we have an amazing guest. I was telling her this before we got onto the to record that as a journalist we love rabbit holes. We love to find out about somebody and then go deeper and deeper, and then you find even more great stuff. This woman has done enough for two resumes, enough for two Hall of Fame resumes. And when you find out who she is and what she's done, you're going to want to step up your game and really be more inspired. We are speaking with the one and only Teri Schindler. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Keith. Thanks.
Now, the reason why I say you have enough for two resumes and two Hall of Fame careers is because you've been, I like to call you a master disruptor. Is that fair to say?
That's so interesting. Never started to be that.
Okay.
I just started to pursue what I wanted to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, I guess certain things got disrupted.
Yeah, because I always say you can't make history without a little bit of disruption because it's not there. It's not there yet, and you're making a reality that hasn't been made. And let's start at the beginning a little bit. I know that there's been televised women's basketball games since I think 1975. I think in January, but you helped make the first women's basketball package televised games. And explain to me why that, and that was in 1990, right?
Yes.
Explain to me why that is so significant. We had, like I said, we had televised games before. Explain to me why that was so significant and how we're still reaping the benefits of what you did in 1990.
So first of all, when you brought up those dates, which I hadn't really ever focused on, I was like, why did it take so long,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think what was really happening were some interesting things. First of all, Gino in Storrs, Connecticut was going gangbusters with his women's basketball program. They were 35-0. They were just setting all these records. They were changing the game, literally changing the game. And at the same time, Title IX was coming in, and so there was a lot of attention in the Big East offices about that. And then also, the Big East was in the process of sending their television network over to what eventually became ESPN Regional. And so all of this stuff was happening. I'm in my 20s. I'm working in the offices. And I realized I'm going to be out of a job because they're going to offload this television network. That was where I had been working. And so I asked them, I said, could I see the contract of what you're, can I just see what we're doing? And as I read it and I looked at all the things, and it's talking about technologies not yet discovered, and, it's covering all these things. And nowhere does it mention women. So I thought, well, okay. So I picked up the phone and I called UConn and I said, in my reading of this, you have the rights to your games. And they said, well, yeah, but we don't know how to do games. I said, yeah, but I do. And so that's how we started it. And so we started it with their public television station. And I took the public television crew and we taught them how to do basketball games. And it was different because they pledged during the half times, and they did it wasn't an ESPN broadcast, but they were such fans, and the people in Connecticut wanted to see these games. So it ended up being a great thing, and they still have that package, which I'm proud of.
Wow.
I'm proud of for them.
And so this is it's amazing that it wasn't televised before. When you had Gino, when you had UConn, one of the most dominant, and now you can't turn on an ESPN game when UConn was playing
Right.
in the 90s, 2000s, when they were dominating, developing all of these historic stars. So would you say that you taking that chance and you reading the contract? Like if you didn't read the contract, maybe it would have taken a little bit longer for that to happen. But do you feel like you just reading that contract allowed for this wave of interest in women's sports from being in terms of televised space?
I mean, I'd love to say that was the case, but what really is the case is they were that good.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a moment in time. They were undefeated. They were really changing the way people were perceiving women's college basketball, so I think it really had to do with them, and then the ability to say, hey, maybe we could do something here, because it's actually not been sold off to the regular distribution networks.
And then, so how did that lead? So you did that, and I know before we get to WNBA, you did a lot of other amazing things with March Madness. You could explain to us how you was the first woman to produce March Madness,
I was.
and how did you find your way? And the reason why I'm asking is because, and you can explain from your perspective, it was a very male-dominated space in the 80s, early 90s. How did Teri Schindler find her way into getting that prestigious role of producing the most, usually the most watched sporting time of the year?
Well, thanks for the question. It was an interesting thing. I swam at Notre Dame, and I became an All-American there, but I was part of the group that took the team from being club to being a varsity sport, right? And so there were just some things about that were really important to me. The idea of team, the way things worked. I then got my first job was at the Big East Conference. Now I'm in my 20s. And that was an incredible job. I mean, they're answering the phone like Big East Conference, 3 teams in the Final Four. You know, this is the culture that we're in. And because of that, I had a front row seat to sort of the way the distribution and the television of the games was changing. We had partnerships with CBS, so I would be dealing with CBS. I would be doing everything from scheduling the satellite time to scheduling the announcers. So it was an incredible first job. So that gave me access to a lot of the people. I'll tell you a funny story. There was at one point, John Thompson. He's a legend.
Shout out to John Thompson.
And he called up one day into the office, and he said, there's a nor'easter coming, and we're not going to make it to Providence for the game. Mm-hmm. Now I look outside. It's not snowing yet, okay, but like there is a nor'easter coming, and. So they say, Teri, you're low man on the totem pole. You have to get on the CBS conference call. They're all in Norway doing the Olympics. And you have to tell them that they can't have that game because that game's not going to happen. Okay. So I get on this phone call, and I'm listening for 45 minutes to all this, what's going to happen on ski slopes and what's going to happen, wherever, what all the events are down there. And finally someone says, okay, is there anything else that has to come up on the call? So I kind of squeak out, hi, this is Teri Schindler from Providence, the Big East offices. And they said, well, hello there, Teri Schindler from Providence. And I said, yeah, so there's a nor'easter coming through, and so Georgetown-Providence game won't be available because Georgetown won't be able to make the game. There's just silence on the call. And I am the most junior person on this call. And then somebody says, Teri, we're over here in Norway, and it snows a foot every single night, and we're doing the Winter Olympics. How much could it possibly be snowing in Providence, Rhode Island? And and I'm looking outside, it's still not snowing, and I said, nevertheless, here's the rest of the games that you can potentially put on your air. And it was so funny because it did snow. It did not cause the end of the world, but the next day I had to do a cut-in for the Olympic feed with Bill Raftery, and there was it was blue sky, it was beautiful out, so I hired a bunch of kids to throw snow in the background as we did the stand-up, just so it didn't seem like so there were a lot of things like that. Like, that was the greatest first job ever.
You was telling the kids, like, yo, throw some snow real quick so we could make a little TV magic.
Exactly. So then I started doing games. I'm at the Big East, and I started saying, hey, can I do some games? And they're like, well, I mean, you could have the worst game, or you can have the game, and we're not going to pay you as much as everybody else. And I just was like, great, I'll just do the games. And then that culminated where I started working with NCAA Productions. And so favorite game ever, I did Princeton-Georgetown. Mm-hmm. Crazy game, crazy backdoor game. So I had enormous opportunity because of that job, and I was able to go ahead and parlay that into different opportunities with the NCAA or with CBS or whoever.
And then from that, you gained their respect and trust to be able to do March Madness at the age.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it was hard won. Don't get me wrong. I remember doing a football game at the University of Miami, and they were so uncomfortable with a woman producing a football game that someone came down at halftime from the box and made me prove that I had done a replay of every play that happened in the red zone.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, but sure, fine. So there were a lot of moments like that. There were great moments where people were really, really very, very helpful. But there were also, someone like Bobby Knight, not really happy when I show up on site to do his game. So he turns out and he locks us out of the gym. I can't set up. I got my cameraman all outside. And I don't want to call CBS and say, I got locked out of the gym.
Yeah.
And so I don't. And I said, everybody, take dinner. We're going to wait here. And he's got to take the locks off the door sometime. Takes the locks off the doors. We set up. We get on the air by 8 o'clock. Like 5 years later, I meet one of the CBS guys on the street. And he said, I always wanted to ask you this. You're on record for the most expensive college basketball game we ever produced. And I said, oh, was it Indiana? And he said, yeah. And he said, what happened? And I said, yeah, they locked us out of the gym. So, so it was hard won, but I got great opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean by the master disruptor, because you don't let anything stop you from making what you gotta make happen. And before we go on to your career, I want to go into the person real quick. Has that always been you since you was a kid, a teenager? Were you the one who was your dad would say something and you'd be like, why? Just asking questions to get to the bottom of it. Where did this disruptive energy come from?
It's funny you should ask this. My family was at the dinner table, and my parents were talking. We lived in Pittsburgh, and my parents were talking over our heads, and I'm the oldest of three, and they were saying, wouldn't it be great if one of our boys went to Notre Dame? And I got myself into such a huff, and I said, well, I don't even understand why you would say that. I'm going to go to Notre Dame. I didn't even know what Notre Dame was. I'm going to go to Notre Dame. And everyone just burst out laughing. And they're like, Teri, they don't let women in. And I said, well, then how good could they be? Fast forward, when I'm in high school, that was the only place I applied. So I guess I was born with it. I don't know.
I understand being confident, but that being the only place you applied?
Well, I did it early enough that I would have the backup. I could do the backup, so I did it early.
Teri, you might say, that's a wild decision, but yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, do it early. Yeah, if it didn't pan out, Penn State and something like that can go.
Exactly.
I like that. So with that, like you said, with that being said, and you, by the time you're let's say you was done with the Big East and college sports, around what age would you say? 20?
Oh, when I got out of there, probably right around 30.
So right around 30, you've already made some significant history when it comes to March Madness, when it comes to televised women's sports, and then you went and joined the NBA.
Yeah. Then I went to the NBA.
And then explain to me what, I kind of want to just dig into how did that lead to you becoming somebody who helped bring the WNBA to life?
So that's part of why I went to the NBA.
Gotcha.
So I was dealing with Adam Silver, who's now the commissioner, obviously, great guy. And
what was Adam doing back then?
He was chief of staff for
Hey,
David.
okay.
And he was looking to try to figure out how to set up the WNBA. And to be honest with you, they couldn't find people who had done a lot of women's basketball because at the time it just wasn't on. And I'm doing the UConn package. So I had an agent at the time, and he introduced me to Adam at a Knicks game. I had never been to the Garden for a pro game. He introduced me, and then we went from there. But I just had a lot of experience in televising women's sports, so I knew, look, you're not going to get that, the dunking action at the time. You weren't going to get that. It was faster around the edges. There was more passing, and so what did you do for replays? How did you set it up? So those are the kinds of things. So that's why I got in. So they hired me to actually start the WNBA with a group of women.
In 90?
Well, so it was 96 was the Olympics in Atlanta. Okay. So it was that next, right after the Olympics is when we started.
So it was like a concerted effort to kind of develop this WNBA.
Yeah.
And they needed some, and that's why I think people kind of get, they lose sight of is that we see the Adam Silvers, we see the David Stearns, we see the players and the teams, and we think that those are the people, and those are the people who develop these leagues. But at the foundation, you need to get the broadcasters people. You need to get the people who doing merchandising. You need to get the people who are marketing. And so, when I found out that you helped, at first when I found out, okay, she helped bring the WNBA to life, my initial thought was, oh, she must have been some sort of like, agent who brought this together. When I found out you was in broadcasting, it made me go, of course. Like, you need a key component of that, and that you just explain how the game is different than the NBA. You need somebody who's intimate knowledge of that. So when you joined, what was some of the I guess the learning curve you had to get through when it came to finally launching the WNBA? Like, it's a new league. It's the talent was there. The talent was amazing, but like, what were some of the things in terms of from your perspective? Because you was vice president of broadcasting, right? Mm-hmm. So what were some of the things that that the league had to learn and had to like get over in the first 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about it, right, the men's leagues have been around. Mm-hmm. So they're like on autopilot, right? They've got the sports pages, they've got all the distribution that they need, they've got the talk radio, they've got everything that they have. And here you're really starting from scratch. And so that really was what interested me so much, is like how often do you get to do that? Now it feels like you can, because there's new leagues every day that pop up. But at the time, it was sort of the basic, the usual suspects, let's call it. And that's why I think David Stern was ahead of his time in just even envisioning that this was actually an area of growth. And he was a little bit, I would say, he was very prescient in what it could become and what it and how to develop it. But at the same time, you don't have a lot of things. So that first logo for the WNBA, that was Jerry West, that they put a ponytail on and they gave a chest to in the beginning, right? So like, when I tell you have to start from scratch, you literally have to start from scratch. Oh. That was an iconic figure that had been around for a long time as a logo. So some stuff that came up were things like, well, what are we going to do? We're not really going to have the Knicks cheerleaders. Like, that doesn't seem exactly right. And so we were the ones that developed the kid dance teams, which are now still everywhere in the NBA. So like, we initiated this, and then the NBA imported it into their game. So I think in Boston it's called Lil Funk, and there's a bunch of different ones. But so yeah, thinking about how you were going to do that. The other big thing that came up a lot was merchandising. Are you just going to be an offshoot of the NBA and get like a piece of their deals? And so maybe that makes sense with Nike or someone like that.
Yeah, like Gatorade or something like that.
But like, what about nail polish and team colors? And what about, Build-A-Bear? And what about some of these other things? And at the time, women's sports, and I think it still feels this way a little bit, it feels like a gift to our daughters. And so it was very family. It was very much less a business crowd that was coming in and had seats and seeing and be seen. And this was going to be more like a family. And I want my daughters to see what's possible, and I want my sons to see what's possible. So it was a whole different vibe around who was coming in and who was interested, and then maybe what they wanted to see, and what they wanted to buy. So I think and I don't think they necessarily envisioned all of that. Like, they did some stuff, like, for example, we had a Barbie, but you would say that might be more obvious. But I think some of the other ways that you could look at merchandising, like, even till now, I think that whole shrink it and pink it thing, like really getting a merchandising strategy around what women wanted to wear. Like, do women want to wear replicas? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe they want to do some other things. So I think it was all those questions coming up at the same time. And it was so interesting. It was like the best startup ever in the middle of the mothership.
Yeah. And to that point, what was your, I know that storytelling is central to everything you do, even now, but especially back then, in broadcasting, and like, I think that was where you could really get an edge when it comes to, like, you might not have the familiarity of the league being around for decades, but if you can tell a good story, you can grab anybody. Same thing like with a good movie. Like, it might not be Men in Black 6, but if it's Sinners and it has a great story, you can captivate people. When you, whether it was you at home with the whiteboard or you at the office, like, what was your mentality when it comes to the storytelling behind the league?
Well, I think our basic premise was we had to introduce them. So they did have a bit of an introduction with the Olympics. So the top players had gone through Atlanta and had won the gold. And so we had, I did the documentary on that team. So we knew we had sort of some base, but now you had a bunch of franchises and you had to introduce people to who these women were. This is not like we watched them in 8th grade, we watched them in high school, we watched them in college, and now we're watching them in the NBA. And so I think that was the basic premise. And the good news is they were all trailblazing women. You get someone like Allison Feaster, who's playing at Harvard and then goes, is now at the Celtics, or Becky Hammond. Like, they all had incredible stories. Teresa Weatherspoon, Ruthie Bolton, Cynthia Cooper.
My girl, oh man.
I mean, and so basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to introduce a cast of characters to the American public who are kind of like, wait, what's happening? Do we need this? When is this happening? What's going to happen? So that was the premise for the storytelling. It really was, how many features can we do? How can we talk about the women? How can we talk about, in some cases, their children? How do we talk about how they broke through? We had Annie Myers doing games, so she had great stories to tell as well. That set the scene.
Love that. And you produced a documentary, a really, really, really well done documentary. We Got Next. That I remember watching. When I was doing my research, I was watching it, and I remember watching it as a kid. I was like, oh, because like
you watched it as a kid?
Yeah, because I was big. I was a Comets fan.
Okay.
So I was a big Comets fan for the first season, because I was like, oh, this is fun. It's extra basketball, you know what I mean? And it's good basketball. And me and my mom used to watch it. My dad watched it too. And it was just a good way to like. And it was like, I think it was like 32 games for the first season, so it was something you can get into, and then like it's there and it's gone, and you can come back and want more. But when I watched the documentary, I was like, she's getting a lot of access for her first year. Like, and I know that I've seen NBA teams that they won't let you in the locker room.
Yeah.
They won't let you in the locker room. How bought in were the players and the teams in terms of like the storytelling?
No, they were bought in. It's a great question. They wanted to do this. They felt like they were making history. They were making history. So we built into the contracts and into the ways that we did it. Like, hey, there's going to be this much access. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they were on board. Like they were our partners in that, because they were trying to build something too.
Were there any moments that stick out to you from that access that, like, whether good or bad or just inspirational, or things that just stick out to you?
I think there was always like a line that you had to sort of watch, because they would give you enormous access. And so even when we were following the Olympic team, I traveled with the Olympic team before they went to Atlanta, and you saw a lot, and then you got a lot. So then it was sort of, how do you keep the trust and make sure that everyone, because everyone's sort of united in this, we want a legacy, we want to put this out there. You're way out on the diving board, right? And you're trying to figure out. And so I think today is so different now, because everyone has a cell phone, and there's all this gotcha moments, and I heard you in the locker room, and this and that, and there you sort of were privileged to have a bunch of access. And so always trying to craft the story, keep it really authentic, keep it real, but respect for the participants.
Gotcha. And like you said, I mean, I'm sure there wasn't any Bobby Knight locking you out moments and stuff like that.
No.
But I know in broadcasting, there's always fires you got to put out, and the people like you are the ones who are putting it out so that us fans don't even know anything's going on. Are there any moments where you was like, I had to make some work behind the scenes to make sure this broadcast got out at the right time? Or
I remember something about having to sew some uniforms at one point, like at the last second. But I think mostly what was happening was, it wasn't just what was happening on the court. It was also what was happening in the broadcast booth. So we had women broadcasting, and it was also what was happening with some of the crews. And so more what would happen, or more some of the behind the scenes stuff, is if people were waiting to see people fail, or like anytime you're out there trying to do stuff and you're trying to keep it, and these are people who hadn't done thousands of games, or who hadn't, and I think that was where you would there were more moments. Like TV's always like that, right? You got to get on the air at 8 o'clock, and they don't care if you have 8 cameras or 1 camera, but no one's putting up bars at 8 o'clock. You're going on the air. So there's always moments that that's just live television. But I think so many people breaking in at the same time. And it's funny, back in the Big East days, I was doing a lot of the halftime content for the league, right? And so it was Title IX, and so the NCAA was saying, hey, you gotta give the women's report. And there were a lot of guys out there. They didn't give a hoot. They're pronouncing the women's names wrong. They don't know, and I don't blame them, right? But I went to Dave Gavitt and I said, Dave, there's got to be some women who play ball who can be good at television. So guess who put Doris Burke on the air?
Ooh,
I did on the Big East package.
Let me shake your hand for that. Let me shake your hand for that.
So that's because I wanted someone who knew the game and who could actually give us a report that had some substance behind it, wasn't just reading whatever the script said. Also, I think there were a lot of backroom moments with ESPN, but one of the things I'm really proudest of is we were able to convince them that, hey, these players should be on the sets. They know the game better than anyone. Are we going to do the draft? Why don't we have them be the hosts? Let's not bring somebody else, let's bring people who know. And now to see this explosion of women sportscasters and talking about all this, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Because basically what you're trying to do is you're creating an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But those first moments of an ecosystem, they can be herky-jerky because you can have some gaps,
See, this is what I say, and I obviously you're very humble and you understand your place in history, and you don't want to take all the credit for it. Like when I mentioned earlier about you looking through the contract led to UConn getting all this television fame, and you was like, no, the team was just really good. I understand that, and I understand that maybe you wasn't the single force that made female broadcasters come on to like ESPN or have this explosion, but it takes it takes somebody to spark for like a flame to start, and putting Doris Burke, and that platform, putting the athletes and the sportscasters on ESPN to talk about the draft. Now you see them everywhere.
Yeah, it's so great.
It's so amazing.
Great. It's so great.
And they're supremely talented. They're leading. They're not just.
They're articulate. They know. Yeah, they're great.
And they're not just parts of the shows. They are leading the show. Like NBA Today, Malika Andrews leading the show. Like that's her show to lead. And before her, they had a bunch of other people too. It's just amazing to see that this is part of the genesis of that, is something where it was like, hey, it makes sense. Why don't you have women who understand the game speak about women who are in the game? Like, it sounds so simple, but it's like, I did want to ask before.
But those were some heavy discussions with ESPN. They were not.
Beyond just ESPN, were there any people within the NBA who was like hoping this experiment would fail?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think so. I think everybody always wanted it to succeed, but I do think there was always. So let's just say I started at Procter & Gamble. Mm-hmm. At Procter & Gamble, you might work on Tide, you might work on Charmin. They are not considered hierarchical, except if the market's bigger or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's basically these are the things we sell. I think one of the biggest it's not an advancement, but one of the biggest light bulbs that went off in the NBA offices was, hey, we have a portfolio of products now. We got men's basketball, we've got women's basketball, we've got G League, we've got what we have, and so this idea that like you're only going to work on this or you're only going to work on this, I think that was something that we were consistently trying to push the edges on of like, hey, we should be doing this together. I remember in particular one moment where I suggested maybe we talk to Build-A-Bear to somebody, and I wasn't in charge of this, and I just said, hey, what if we talk to them? And someone said, well, Teri, if the WNBA needs this. And at the time I thought, you know what? Both the leagues need this. I'm not sure why we're doing that. And I can understand why you might do it at some points, but it did expand the notion of what sponsorships were, who you were targeting, how you were going to reach them, what they might want. And so I think those were the discussions. Those were always really the gnarly discussions, because some stuff is this is how we've always done it. And you're like, yeah, but this is like completely different. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's the same game, but it's different.
And then I remember when in 2002, you guys were negotiating a distribution deal with Oxygen to carry 11
Yeah.
games. And Oxygen is famous for having female-led programming and
Yeah.
things of that nature. And in an interview, you said that part of it is because getting a female viewer is difficult. Why was it difficult, and what were you noticing in the first 4 or 5 years?
Well, we weren't acculturated to watching women's sports. That's the first thing. And I learned a lot about like the formal distribution networks, which right? The networks and the ESPNs of the world. But I didn't know about the informal distribution networks, which is, for men, it was a social currency to talk about like what happened in the game. For women, it wasn't necessarily a water cooler discussion. So I remember the first time someone told me that they put sports pages up over urinals sometimes, and I was like, oh, so that's interesting. So it's sort of like there was, it seemed like there were all these ways, both formal and informal, that men had this information, and women didn't have that. So I was trying to figure out, how do you actually reach people? How do you get them to come over? And then also there were some women who would just say to me straight out, like, you expect me to watch this. Like you're saying, I have to check this box. And I'm like, I actually just want you to watch it because I think it's good. But there was some backlash that way. So anytime you're priming a new market, you're trying to do product market fit, and you're trying to figure out how do we start to create that conversation. This is a cultural asset. So how do we start to create that cultural conversation around this? And so it was thinking about things like, I remember going into one meeting and saying, does anybody know what a circular is? And like everyone just looked at me, no. And I said, well, on Sunday newspapers, back when we had newspapers, it was the coupons that came out, and Procter & Gamble would have a whole thing. And I said, that's a distribution. That's an informal distribution network. We can put tune-in information in here. I don't know. Could it work? Maybe, maybe not. Procter & Gamble became one of our big sponsors. So it's sort of, it made you rethink all the networks. I think that's the biggest, that's really the biggest thing. And I had a really long conversation with Isaiah Thomas about this one night.
What did he say?
He really was very encouraging about being innovative and rethinking the networks. And so I was just sort of running. He was a really good sparring partner in terms of helping me figure out certain ideas to advance or not.
Gotcha. And that's a great way to segue into one of the questions I'm going to ask is like, you have all these great ideas, like put into a circular. That's like an amazing idea to cause that. Are there any ideas that you presented during your time in WNBA that maybe were ignored or what were adopted that now are like second nature?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think that the game has also changed.
Yeah.
And the distribution networks have changed, because now, like, I've got a goddaughter who's playing this weekend in the North Carolina, state championships, right? And so that wasn't there. That we didn't have quite the same pipeline. So I think the game has changed, and I mean the game, like the game writ large, the networking, the networks, how things are, how content is being distributed, how people are finding the product and are being interested in the product, and obviously, we have players coming in now that are completely changing everything. So that's the growth. Like, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep this thing, you're trying to get this off the ground and then let the growth happen. So I think some of those ideas in the early, some of them were misfires for sure. But we were just trying to say, how do we get our foot in the cultural landscape? I know you're a cultural reporter, right? Like, how do you get your foot in the cultural landscape? How do you start to create some buzz around this and try to just really raise awareness of it for, as much as anything else?
Whether it was while you was in the WNBA or after, is there like it could be an anecdotal or like a small moment, like seeing a little girl, yell out, Adrian Wills is my favorite. Are there moments that you think back and go, okay, they finally made it into the culture? Like,
yes. My little niece was, I forget who she was, but she had a replica jersey on for Halloween, and I think I would document all these things anytime I would see anything from the very beginning, like, okay, this just happened. Okay, this just happened. So as you start to see it come down through the culture and come back up and be reimagined by the culture, that's the best. That is absolutely the best. But there are definitely, like, I have images where you see something, not images like, okay, we made this thing or we made that. But like when someone authentically picked up what you were laying down and you know, went with it.
Wow. And unfortunately, right now we're going through a little bit of a CBA issue and cultural issue within the WNBA with leadership and the talent. During your time there, and we can get to what's happening now. During your time there, were there any like issues when it came to like or doubts that the league might go on because of the relationship between the players and leadership? Like, how was that dynamic back in like 97, 98, 99?
I mean, in those early years, people were just like happy to be there, I think. But I think with every endeavor, right, it's kind of like me doing games for half of what other of the, you know, my male counterparts were being paid at the time, just like, because you should be glad that you actually have this space. I think there's always then arises, right? That question arises. And so they're doing great with the ratings. They're doing great with the numbers. So, you know, I think it's inevitable that you get to a moment where you have to start to talk about like what's actually fair. So I don't know. I do hope so much. I'm not very close to this situation at all, but I do hope that they work it out, because especially right now, like sports is such a sanctuary. It's a place, like it's the big tent. We can all go in there. There's nothing really. It's, you know, we can have conversations about things that aren't, you know, life-severing conversations. And so it's really important, I think, that the sports leagues lean into that. It's an incredible asset that they have at a strange time in culture.
Yeah, it's, and this is like, it's so, it seems like it's so like a bad time for this to happen, but then you can also see how it was inevitably going to get to this point.
Yeah.
Because now the WNBA, like just in the last 6 years, I remember somebody told me like that Liberty used to play their games in Westchester.
I went to one of those games and I was like, wow, yeah.
And like, and then like, they just had like, they just won a WNBA title in Barclays. And honestly, everybody will tell you they're the best ticket in Barclays, like even way better than the Nets. I've been to a Liberty game in the last 3 years. It is rocking. It is way bigger.
It's a community.
Yeah, and I always, let me make this very clear to anybody who is doing sports. Stop saying that New York has a drought with championships. They say we haven't had a major championship in basketball since we had the Liberty. I keep telling all my sports fans or all my journalists, make sure you put some respect on that title, because that parade was a real parade.
Yes,
that was an insane parade. For you, when you said something in an interview that was so poignant that it kind of made me want to think about the way that I go about work. You said that you usually leave places when the place isn't adopting new emerging technologies or changes aren't being made quick enough. What wasn't being adopted or wasn't changing quick enough with the NBA or WNBA when you left?
So I do that. I may change with AI, I don't know. But I think that one of the things that I really wanted to see, it was the best place ever to have the technology. I did NBA finals. I did a lot of things and they were great. But what I was seeing happening was sort of that portfolio effort, right? Like, how do we segment the audiences? How do we demographically target who's really interested in this? And how do we think about our fandoms differently? So I've been really interested in community that forms around sports. I stayed in sports longer than I would have because of those dynamics. The way people gather around something, the way they root for it, the way they start to identify with it, that was all leading edge for what's now happening in a lot of places, right? And so I think I wanted to see more effort around sort of that the demographics of this and how we could really reach out to people in certain ways. So, for example, I was doing the NBA finals, and you have 7 games over the course of whatever weeks, and I realized once you got the technical things out of the way, we would go to 400 countries. We would basically take NBC's feed. We would put it back out. And once you got it all worked out, it was a pretty straightforward endeavor. And so I thought, well, this could be more interesting. We could really galvanize in the global community. So I realized nobody could see my feed downstream. And so I started just soliciting people to email us while we were on the air. The only caveat was it had to be in English because there was only 2 of us. And I would say, tell us where you are, who you're rooting for, are you going to work tomorrow, what time is it where you are, and why are you going to work tomorrow? And I would come out of break with like, okay, here's Allen Iverson, and I've got something from the Canary Islands, and I've got something from China, and I've got something from Brussels, and they're all talking about Allen Iverson and how they're not going to work tomorrow and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, this is such an interesting way to capture how the global market is thinking about these people, right?
It's before Twitter.
It was. I used to say I invented Twitter. So anyways, I think that's the kind of stuff that you can do with sports, right? It is a community. People care about it. And so because you have that, you learn a lot about those dynamics. And that's the kind of stuff that I was really interested in, like how those dynamics played out around the different the NBA versus the WNBA, what was the interplay, what was happening, and really wanted to get much more into that kind of fan stuff, which sort of resided at the level of the teams. It didn't really reside at the league level.
So how did that interest in community and emerging technology, how did you transfer that over to what you've been doing with Herzog and Schindler?
Thank you for asking that. I think that that idea of creating community has never been as resonant as it is right now. Meaningful connections. And how do you create those meaningful connections? And sports has them in abundance. And so one of the things that we started to work on right away was something for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is America's innovation lab. And they wanted to know, what are the dynamics of community among research scientists who are really interested in something around physics or some really important forward-facing discovery in those areas. So how can I leverage what I know about how communities form? How can I leverage what's happening on platforms to create that kind of an environment? And that was so interesting. We did a project with ARPA-H, which is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And they wanted to ask people, what's one idea that could transform U.S. health? And just they gave people a way to talk about it, and they said, if you have an idea, we want to see it. And we did it in a March Madness bracket format, so you could, and then we had the ideas face off. And everyone, when I talk about that program, everyone's like, well, you did that because you did March Madness and you're a basketball person. And I said, to be honest with you, that idea came from the private equity community. And they said, why don't you look at these ideas as contestants and then let people vote and upvote them into an idea? And I'm happy to say that the runner-up to that bracket contest got $26 million from the government for a specialized stem cell application. So that's the crossover right there, right? Like that's how do we bring people together? What is the arena? Can I create an arena that's not an arena? And can I give people dynamics for them to relate to each other and advance ideas or advance causes or whatever? That's kind of the overlap for me.
So explain to people why do people come to Herzog and Schindler? Like what is your unique position in the market that gets people like DARPA and gets people like all these different companies that want to come to you? Like what is your unique advantage or the thing that you provide?
Well, I think that one of the things is obviously this idea of community and storytelling, because that's what I did for so long. And so the idea of what is a brand, but something that you're trying to have a relationship with a culture, right? With a way to a way of being. And so thinking about the stories that you tell and the way you talk about it and the design that you use and what's happening, but bigger than that, creating that arena so that people can have this arena to be in and feel good about. I think that's really where we come from on all these things. And then I think the biggest thing that's happening right now is, or one of the big things that's happening, biggest thing is AI, but one of the things that's happening right now is how people, the last best experience you just had, I don't care if it was going to the dentist or going to the zoo or coming here, is now the standard for every experience you expect to have. So by not being a specialist And by being a generalist, you can say, hey, this is happening over here. Why can't we import this and bring this here? This is a better way to do this. We all wait in line at some place. This is a better way to wait in line. This is a better way to order. So because there's so much interface and there's so many of these things, it's all jumbled up. And so it's like, how do you take those component parts and make the best possible experience? So that's really what, that's the sort of the point of view that we come from on this.
Got you. And forgive me for, I don't want to mess up your other company's name.
Polyplexus?
Polyplexus, yes. And can you explain more about how that, is Polyplexus and Herzog kind of like sister companies?
It's a product that we developed with the government, and then we're commercializing it. So it's basically a platform with 10,000 experts in science and technology, and who can come together quickly, like a broadcast, to talk about a topic of interest. So as opposed to laboring away, quietly in their own space, and then everybody sending proposals in, you can actually gather them in an arena, present a problem, and ask them to give their pre-competitive knowledge sources around that, and then solicit abstracts. So it's a way to gather experts in a room without physically being in a room, and get direction for a research program.
Got you. And you said the magic term that everybody is saying and pouring $1 trillion in AI. How has that affected your product and also Herzog and Schindler? Like how much of AI?
Yeah, it's changing a lot. It's changing everything. I think that's still to be played out. We were driving in today, and I was listening to the stuff, and I'm like, this sounds like a sci-fi novel. We're talking about fully autonomous weapons, and we're talking about surveillance. I think stay tuned. More to come.
Give me your moonshot idea. Give me your without. I mean, I know you probably got some NDAs, stuff like that, but give me your moonshot. I love asking people this, like, what is your moonshot idea for AI? Like for me, I told somebody that.
Yeah, tell me yours.
At some point, and if it happens, hey man, I want my check. I said that at some point there's going to be an AI application where we see how they're making movies and they're making shows and all that stuff. There's going to be a way where people are going to be able to, I guess, make a clone of themselves digitally.
Get digital twin.
A digital twin that instantaneously for certain parts of what you need to be trained in. So say if you're saying there, like, it's not gonna be a general like, hey, a direct clone of everything in my brain. It's gonna be like, oh man, I need somebody to help me study for this math test and everything like that. Let me just upload all the stuff that I've done. Let me speak to him for a little bit. Sort of like a Jarvis from Iron Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that where you can like literally, and it's thinking, but it's thinking in the background, it's learning. So while you're figuring something out, it's like an angel in your voice, but like, no, I don't know about the answer. Are you sure about that? Are you sure? Yeah. Something where like, it's kind of like it's always on, which is creepy, but it's very helpful when you're just like, 'cause I think a lot of times people don't know when to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that will just eliminate that barrier of asking for help. It'll just be analyzing and be like, hey, you've been kind of slacking on this. You sure you want to go out and get beers and stuff like that? You might want to just, so like an AI assistant, on like steroids.
Yeah.
What about you? What's your?
I mean, I keep thinking about whether, like, what does being human mean, and will human interaction become a luxury good? Like, so if you're always calling, and you're getting AI agents doing all this stuff, if you're a really high end, and you're always seeing people like they're emphasizing craft, they're emphasizing, things that are not reverted to the mean. So I think about that a lot. What does it mean to be human in this context? Because there's a lot of people thinking about the AI. What does it mean about the AI? And so I think trying to balance the scales a little bit is usually where I come at it from.
I think this is the first one-on-one podcast episode where we've started out in the Big East, and now we're wondering about the existential questions of what it is to be human.
There you go.
Teri, I could speak to you for hours. I want to say thank you for just the amount of knowledge you just bestowed on us, the history you bestowed on us. I'm never gonna look at Jerry West the same anymore with that ponytail.
They've redone it since then.
But I just want to say thank you for everybody tuning in. Thank you for MNN for having us recording this space. Please subscribe to the channel, Pillars. We're going to have more one-on-one conversations with interesting people. It's going to be hard to top Teri. It will be really hard to top her, but we're going to have so many different people of different disciplines. And everybody have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.